So when I started school at a time that in Zambia, we were getting everything free. We had free education. We literally had free everything. We just had to take ourselves to school and everything would be available to us. So life was good after independence, free education, free this and that. So for us, that's the Zambia that we expected to see after independence. After independence, we had a lot of state-owned companies. Most of our parents are people of my generation. Most of our parents worked in state-owned enterprises. My father, for many years, worked for a state-owned enterprise called Zambia Railways. And that meant that you got freebies from these state-owned companies. So for us, it was getting on free train rides whenever we were going anywhere. And we had a few of those, going from Zambia to Zimbabwe. And I think even my first trip to Botswana was by train all the way from Lusaka to Lobase via Zimbabwe through Plumtree and all the way up to Lobase. The trains worked there in this part of the world. So, and for us that was okay, life was good. But things started changing, and changing very rapidly. There were a lot of reasons behind the changes that we were seeing, but overall the effect on us as citizens of Zambia was that we started experiencing things like having to pay for school. So we had a fee called the sports fund. I think that was the first fee that was introduced. It was just 1 kwacha, and 1 kwacha wasn't a lot of money then. It could buy you a lot compared to now, but it wasn't a lot of money. But Zambians started feeling the pinch. By 1991, I think things had gone so crazy that we decided to change government. Zambians felt the problems that we were seeing were as a result of having a government that was not managing things well. I will not go into all those details, but in 1991 we changed. And when we changed, I had, a few years later, I graduated and I was working in the development sector. And one of the things that we were really interested in seeing was the impact that the changes, the new government was bringing on board were having on poor people living in communities. And so with that work, we also got to a point where we were looking at how much money was there in the government coffers to be distributed to the Zambians across social sectors and other services that were needed. And at that time, we realized that 80% of our budget, if not 90% of our budget, was funded by donors. We ourselves, as a country, were putting in very little in terms of the national budget. So 90% came from donors, while 10% came from taxes and other things. And we had a very narrow tax base back then, because when we were transitioning into the new government, at the time that we were actually changing, some civil servants were not being paid salaries because there was no money. My own mother was a teacher, and she had to stop at some point because there was no money to pay teachers, and they just couldn't continue going to work because they were not being paid salaries, so they were asked to go on voluntary retrenchment, I think it was called. So that's got a lot of us thinking in terms of, I was young then, but the other people thought for us. But anyway, they got thinking about increasing domestic resource mobilization. And this is where I want to link it to why we are here today, because the new government then decided they were going to privatize the state-owned enterprises. And this was a change that many of us as Zambians really resisted. The companies that our parents worked for felt like family-owned businesses. So to see them being torn apart, being sold to so-called investors, for us that was a big change and a huge shock. And some of us I think at that time we were a little bit militant. We led a few protests here and there, but not enough to stop anything, and the changes were made. And for me, I couldn't understand why we were destroying what we felt we had built. You know, we had worked so hard as a country to build, and now they were being torn apart. They were being sold to foreign investors. They were being sold to Zambians. And when we saw some of them not continuing, we felt really justified that yes, you know, government made a mistake. They shouldn't have done this. But years later, where I am heading to, I realized that for a country like Zambia to be able to mobilize resources, you need a thriving private sector. And I think this is what finally we as Zambians embraced and started realizing that we really needed to embrace private investors to come on board and to help us develop our country by building businesses that will employ people, and people will pay taxes, and taxes will fund our public services. So this is what we started seeing. And so we now started looking at domestic resource mobilization, and we started